Chapter 6. England, Dawning Court, 4 years ago. Henry was shown into a sitting room to wait. The room was tasteful, if not somewhat plain, he thought. The walls were a cream color with brass-colored sconces. Several chairs and a sofa that matched the walls were placed carefully around the room. Dark oak end tables, gilded with gold, and a matching sideboard accented the color of the other furnishings. Henry sat in one of the chairs, thought better of it, and stood again. Leah glided into the sitting room, followed by her handmaid, Edith. "Milady, I thank you for seeing me unannounced." "Of course, Henry. What is it?" she asked, noting with some concern his paler-than-usual complexion and agitated manner. "It is an exceedingly personal matter, milady, and I would beg leave to speak with you alone." He looked between Leah and Edith, knowing his petition was unorthodox and not the sort of request a respectable lady would frequently grant, if she intended to remain respectable. Nevertheless, Leah turned to Edith without hesitation. "Edith, my dear, would you be good enough to leave us for a short while?" she asked in an apologetic tone. Edith looked as though she would protest, but only flicked a dark glance at Henry and withdrew. "Please, sit down," he said to Leah as soon as Edith closed the door. Leah sat while Henry continued to pace in a feverish manner. "Henry, please, sit a moment and rest, for you are discomfiting me with your manner." Henry sat down rigidly on the farthest edge of the sofa. "Henry, what is it that has you so upset? Are you unwell?" "No, or rather, I am most unwell, milady," he said, struggling to articulate his thoughts. "I must call someone to tend to you at once." Leah started to rise. "No, please," Henry said, quickly extending a trembling hand to her shoulder so he could guide her back into her seat. His hand stopped short. He did not dare allow himself to touch her. "What I mean to say is that I am most unwell, but there is no medical man whose arts could have any power over my ailment. My sickness is of a very different kind. Please," he interrupted her protests, "please do not deign to speak until I have said what I have come to say, for if I do not express what I have purposed to express here and now, I may never find the will to do so." Leah remained quiet, an expression of concern furrowing her brow. "As you may be aware, I will be departing for the Holy Land on the morrow to combat the Moor scourge in that quarter." Henry was once again pacing, pulling on his fingers anxiously. "I am giving myself over, as it were, to the whims of fate, and do not know but that I shall be overcome and struck down." Leah put her hand to her mouth and gasped. "Henry, do not say such things." "Please," he said. "Leah, you are of too wise a temperament and pragmatic a disposition to dispute such a point, and I only state the former as a motivation for appearing before you now in such a barbarous fashion, not as any call for remonstrance." He sighed and sat again, but was just as quickly on his feet a moment later. "Leah," Henry's voice was trembling, "in this last year since William left—" He hesitated, cursing himself for mentioning his brother's name to her. "In this last year I have come to value your friendship very highly. I regard a word from you above any others, I dare say." He laughed nervously at this admission. "Oh, Henry, I too am grateful we have had the opportunity to become friends. It would have been my misfortune if I had never come to know you better." She smiled warmly. Her smile strengthened Henry's resolve. "You are like no other woman I have ever met. In the all too infrequent moments I have had the pleasure of your company, I have never heard you utter a single ill word against anyone. Your fair countenance is rendered ever more beautiful by your gentle disposition." Leah blushed and dropped her eyes. "I am afraid you do me too much credit," she said. "I am afflicted by a great many flaws that you are too good to mention." "Never!" Henry almost yelled. "I could never hear a word uttered against you, not even from your own lips. You are too good and too wonderful. I cannot and will not brook such villainous lies." Her fine eyebrows perked up. "Surely you would not deny me the privilege of acknowledging my own faults." "No, milady, I cannot hear such things. If fault there be with you, you must keep it to yourself, for it is not for mortals as myself to cast aspersions at the gods." She giggled. "Henry, what is it that has put you into such a state?" "Please, Leah," he begged, "please do not laugh at me now. While your laughter is like music to me, at this moment it cuts me to the very core. I have thus to say as my heart compels me, but I fear that I would take it back the moment it has escaped my lips. I have found the mind to typically be the better judge than the heart in such matters, Leah interjected, but Henry did not hear. I leave tomorrow and may never return. I must confess what is in my heart. A tear of emotion stood in his eye and his voice quavered. He dropped onto one knee before her and took her hand in both of his. Leah unconsciously recoiled at the action, but did not dare interrupt him in such a passion. I have said I am unwell, Leah, but it is because my heart is no longer my own. It has been wrenched from my breast as surely as any enemy may have done. I have endeavored to ignore the emptiness its absence has left. I have thought to control my emotions by force of will, but Leah, on this, the eve of my departure into the wastelands of the Saracens, I tell you that I could die a happy and contented man if I but knew my heart was held by one in whose esteem I was held equally high. Leah was not aware of the expression of horror that involuntarily crossed her face. Henry noted it and hesitated, but plunged on despite his crumbling resolve. Leah, I know you are an honorable and true maiden above all others, and you would never pledge yourself falsely, believing you might one day turn back to another. I am down on my knee before you, lady, to pledge my undying love and devotion to you. Will you accept this gift? Humble though it be, a deeper, more heartfelt gift I could never offer to anyone. Leah took a few moments to recover herself, and when she spoke, she did so very carefully. Henry, you do me too much honor to offer such a gift as your devotion. Such an offer from a nobleman, a scholar, and a knight-to-be would be the pride of any woman in England. And while you have my deepest admiration, both as a man and as my friend, you do not have my heart. Henry's head sank, but he remained silent. He feared that if he tried to speak, his words would betray the depth of the wound he had just received. Trouble yourself not, my lord, over one such as me. I pray you not to give this one moment's reflection upon your departure. She gently raised his chin to gaze into his tear-filled eyes. You are too noble. I am not worthy of you. Henry stood and wiped his eyes. You say any maiden would be honored by an offer of such a pledge, and that you are not worthy, and yet you have rejected me. Leah sat back. I assure you, good sir, that I spoke sincerely, she said, her voice echoing the surprise that showed on her face. Why do you rebuff me? Is it for William? He demanded angrily. He is dishonored and disgraced. If he is not already dead, he can never return here. He will never be anything but a cravenly dog. Would you give your heart to one such as that at the expense of your name and the honor of your family? Leah put her hand to her bosom in shock at this abrupt change in manner, but Henry was not yet through. Would you forfeit future happiness and security on the vain hope that a cowardly child will return to you a brave and honorable man? She crimsoned, but bit her tongue and only bowed her head in response. Foolish woman, Henry said, his shame making him angrier still. When I walk out of that door, my offer is withdrawn forever. I suggest you consider this carefully. Leah slowly turned her beautiful hazel eyes up to Henry's fuming countenance, her silence saying more than words could have. Henry turned and stormed out of the room. Angry, humiliated, and soul-sick, he felt that perhaps Jerusalem was not far enough for him now. Chapter 7. England, Dawning Court, present day. Annie stared up at Thomas, her mouth hanging slightly open, her dull eyes revealing nothing. Thomas returned her stare. He was unsure if she even heard him at all. "Do you understand?" he said, enunciating each word as if she were hard of hearing. "The children are playing in the wallow again. You must keep them out of there, or they will get sick." Annie's expression clouded over. "You think I am a terrible mother." Thomas rolled his eyes. "We are not discussing your abilities as a mother." His voice rose slightly, but he forced himself to contain his anger. "I am trying to keep my children safe." Annie turned away and did not respond. She was pouting. Thomas bit back a sharp comment. "Will you please fetch them?" "Why not fetch them yourself if you are so concerned?" Annie responded in a sulky voice, hiding her round face behind her unkempt black hair. "Because I need to call on my mother." "Of course. You walk out on your family at every excuse," Annie said, still turned to the wall. "What are you saying? My mother is my family too, Annie. Why is it that I often feel as though I have 3 children? Just take care of Hannah and Harry and cease your incessant whining, he snapped, and then took a deep breath to collect himself. Look, I will retrieve them from the mud and send them inside. Will you please see that they are bathed? Annie did not respond. Thomas took that to be as close to consent as he was likely to get when she was in this mood. He turned and walked out of his small estate house and around the side of the stone building to where a few animals were kept in pens. "Hannah, Harry, get out of there!" he said to his 3-year-old daughter and his son that was almost 2. His voice was louder and angrier than he intended. The thought struck him that he sounded that way a lot lately. Hannah looked up in shock as if she had been caught stealing sweetmeats from the pantry, her bright red hair completely covered in mud. Chubby little Harry grinned at him from where he was sitting naked in the mire. "You will get sick if you keep playing in there. Now go inside. Your mother is going to give you a bath." "No!" Hannah screamed defiantly and threw a handful of mud at him. "Get inside now or I will beat your bottom!" Thomas did not bother controlling his anger this time. Harry grinned and smeared mud all over his bare belly. Hannah ran for the house, letting out a blood-curdling wail. "Mama! Papa yelled at me!" Thomas went to the fence to pick Harry up, but he was just out of reach. Cursing, he took a step into the ankle-deep mud, leaned over and snatched his filthy son from the mire. Holding the boy at arm's length, he carried him back into the house. At times like this, Thomas frequently pondered the irony of a great warrior doing such menial and silly tasks. This was beneath him, but he knew if he did not do it, no one would. He really needed to employ servants the way his mother did at Dawnings Castle, but other than the cook and the maid, his mother would not fund any other help. She always claimed she could not afford loan requests from Thomas, which they both knew he would never pay back, while she lived in the lap of luxury with 10 times the number of servants in her house as occupants. Because of Martha's unwillingness to give up any of her own personal luxuries, Thomas was forced to live on a small estate on the outskirts of Downingcourt. He scowled at his muddy boots as he mounted his horse and rode toward Dawnings Castle. His boots were expensive, and he did not know if the soft leather would ever come clean. "Some spectacle of a nobleman I must be, knee-deep in the mire," he brooded. This did not fit his image of what nobility was all about, but then he was not sure he fit the image of what nobility was all about. He often wondered if being born to the Baron had not been some accident at birth. Either way, he felt entitled to a life of privilege by the station he was born to, but he did not feel he shared the attributes of his brothers that gave them distinction over the common man. John and Richard were brave warriors that nature had imbued with great size and strength. Thomas was rotund. Henry and Edward had sharp intellects, and William had fine aristocratic features to which the girls had always been partial. Thomas, it was said, was the funny one. Though he had served honorably in a crusade of his own, he had returned without distinction. He had been knighted for his efforts, but he felt in his heart that he was not as good as his warrior brothers. Though he was no coward, he had always preferred to avoid battles rather than charge into them as his brothers did. He had served in the Holy Land, the minimum time required by honor, and then returned and married quickly. His brothers were still in the field and had all far exceeded their requisite time. New stories of their heroics poured in each day. As their reputations grew, Thomas's diminished. He stayed at home with his family, tended his estate, and petered into oblivion. His own exploits, few though they may have been, were noble and had tested his mettle, but who remembered that when Richard was taking on armies of Saracens with only a handful of men, like some biblical prophet, and William was known as the Saracen Scourge? They were unstoppable, like noblemen were supposed to be, but Thomas had never fit into that mold. He privately wondered if he should take it as a sign that he had felt more at home in a tavern with the commoners than with his own kind. He rode to Dawnings Castle on the pretext of seeing his mother and possibly acquiring news regarding his family, but he was actually escaping the frustration he was feeling for his life. Ordinarily he sought out John's company when these moods beset him, but invariably they just ended up drunk. Inebriation and oblivion would come later, when Thomas was done grappling with his problems and ready to surrender to it. After stabling his horse, he entered the castle without comment from the guards stationed at the gates. He found his mother in her customary spot, at her writing table in the library. As usual, she was clothed in her gray dress with her widow's cap in its usual place atop her graying head. It had been so long since he had seen her in anything other than drab colors, he began to wonder if she owned anything colorful any longer. "What news?" he asked without preamble, and dropped heavily down onto the sofa. He was currently the only Dawnings son who routinely saw his mother, and much of the formality between them was gone. He stretched the length of the sofa, putting his muddy boots over the arm. Martha Dawning looked up from what she was doing. "Hello, Thomas. William of York was a holy terror on the battlefield of Damietta, and single-handedly routed the entire city's foot soldiers." Martha repeated the news as it was relayed to her, but was unable to keep the irony out of her voice. They both knew the stories that filtered over the hundreds of leagues between them and the Crusades were distorted, but there was real information to be gleaned from them. One could learn from this tale that William, if this was in fact their William as the description had led them to believe, was alive. The Christians had won the day, and he had, at least to some degree, distinguished himself on the battlefield. "Great," Thomas grunted, feeling even worse about himself. "Anything else?" "Richard's army was decimated at Adrianople by Emperor Calorian." "Is that so?" Thomas lifted his head, suddenly interested. "And Richard?" Martha inspected the document before her with studied disinterest, but was unable to hide her apprehension over her son's well-being. "No word of his fate as yet. Please do not get mud on the furniture, dear." "That is not mud. It is the battle scars of parenthood, thank you very much." "And how did these particular scars come to be marring my furniture?" Martha Dawning asked with no particular interest. "Rescuing my children from the mire." "Again?" Martha was still looking over the sheaves of paper before her. "Perhaps you should just relocate the nursery to the wallow and be done with it." "I am glad this amuses you," Thomas snapped. "My wife seems unwilling or unable to keep them from playing in there." "You chose her for your wife," Martha said absently. "I am aware of that, Mother, but who else would have had me?" Martha looked up at Thomas, who immediately realized he had revealed far more than he intended, blushed furiously, and looked away. "Why would you say such a thing?" she asked simply. "Oh, Mother," Thomas began, his voice cracked with emotion that he had not realized was so close to the surface. "I hate my life. I never intended it to become a long series of trade-offs between monotony and misery. I blame my wife, I resent my station, and I detest my house. I should be doing something to improve my situation, something to increase my standing, but I cannot conceive of what that might be." "And why would you say such a thing?" Martha asked him again. "You have served your God and your country. Your obligation is finished. You married and settled down. There is no dishonor in that. Why should it be necessary to increase your standing?" "I am miserable. Surely I must do something to effect a change in that condition." "And increasing your wealth and power is the answer to your misery, is it?" "Are you suggesting that it is not?" "I have seen many things in this world, but I am not sure I have ever seen anyone find lasting happiness in wealth or power." "Well, perhaps my mind is so occupied with that which I do not have that I am unable to focus on those things that I do," Thomas mused, only half joking. Martha stared at him expectantly. "You know I would not be covered in mud if you would do your job as a parent." He meant this to sound light, but it came out as accusing. She sat back in her chair. "I fail to see how the mud on your clothes is any reflection on me as a parent, other than the fact that I have obviously failed to instill proper manners in you, bringing your muddy clothes into my library." "There is no one to keep them out of the mud. The children, I mean." Thomas ignored her comment about his muddy clothes. "So it is left to me to chase them down." "No one. What about their mother?" "Do you listen to anything I say? She does not do it. She allows them to run free. Her time is consumed by sleeping or socializing." "I am still failing to see how this is my fault," Martha said calmly. She was used to Thomas's manipulations by now, and did not easily get worked up over them. "If you would house us in the style befitting a son of the most powerful baron in England, then this would not be a problem." "House you? I see. So your lamentations over your station in life were not born out of a desire to improve your situation, but rather to have your situation improved for you." So far as I am aware, you are not exactly starving." Thomas crimsoned, taking this as a reference to his rotund figure. "I am an heir of Donincourt. I should think you would be interested in my presentation, particularly given how few heirs remain in good standing. One lousy house servant is all I have, one servant and a cook, while you sit here in this castle that is practically empty save the butlers and cooks and stable boys and ladies in waiting. I have my wife and children to think of. You have only yourself. So tell me again why it is that you think you are owed something. You have life better than most people in the world." Martha's disgust was plain. "And how would you have me pay to keep you in the lap of luxury? Donincourt is nearly broke. Many hard years of rebellions, crop failures, and let us not forget Edward's ill-judged holiday have left us with very little in reserve." "The measure of my status is not relative to every peasant and serf that ekes out his existence from the land. Rather, it is measured among my own kind, and against such I may as well be counted among the serfs, for that is how I would be perceived." Thomas was now on his feet. "I am entitled to better!" he shouted, and slammed a meaty fist on a nearby table for effect. "Why are you entitled? The younger sons of noblemen always have to make their own way in the world." "Perhaps, but I am a full knight. I could go anywhere and receive lands and wealth for my pledge of service, yet I am rejected by my own, who leave me floundering in indigence." "Pledge of fealty? You are a Dawning," Martha exclaimed in exasperation. "Furthermore, I am not just the younger son of a baron any longer. I am the heir to the birthright." His passion gave voice to that which he had hitherto been afraid to say. "Oh?" Martha asked, mildly amused. "And your brothers?" "You have taken care of them for me, mother," Thomas sneered, gaining confidence as he spoke. "You arrogantly presumed to judge John and cut him off because he married Lindsay." Thomas held up his fingers, ticking them off as he listed each brother. "Richard has run off to strange lands. He is either dead or living a new life with the money that he absconded with, and will not return. Edward," he dropped a third finger, "has disgraced the family and run off to live in the flesh pots of the mainland somewhere. That only leaves me. I have been true. I have married well. I have served the church honorably. I am the rightful and remaining heir to the Dawning fortune and the vacant seat of the barony." "Thomas, you must believe me when I tell you there is no fortune," Martha insisted, trying to make Thomas see the facts. "It is gone. All gone." Her amusement had darkened into anger at Thomas's insinuation that she was responsible for her children's misdeeds. "But whether or not you accept that, the one thing you have overlooked in your impertinence is that none of your elder brothers are deceased. Therefore, their claim to the Dawning birthright cannot be discounted. You are correct. I do not know where Edward is, and I sincerely hope the rumors about him are not true. But even if they are, Richard could return at any time and make a claim to the seat, and of course, anyone currently occupying the seat would be an impediment to such a claim. Is that a fight you want?" she asked, looking Thomas squarely in the eye. She knew she was challenging his pride, but she also knew that Thomas had always admired and feared Richard. Thomas glared at her for a moment and dropped his eyes so as not to reveal anything he did not think his mother already knew. "And as far as John is concerned, do not speak of things you know nothing about. John made his decision and chose to shirk his responsibilities." "Why? Because he married a Saxon?" Thomas challenged, echoing the words that John himself had said 1,000 times. "You are a Saxon, mother, and I cannot conceive of a greater hypocrite than you." "You insolent fool!" she hissed at him. "Do you think I am so petty as to concern myself about the Norman-Saxon prejudices, when all that my husband left for the support of my family is about to collapse into dust? That foolishness is for vain youth and old men clinging to antiquated traditions." She was saying more than she intended, but in her wrath she was slow to restrain herself. "If I cherished such prejudices, would I have married Braden Dawning, the epitome of proud Norman nobility? Yet his children are doing no justice to his legacy. His children are not nursing their aging mother, rather each in his turn is a burden on me. John, Richard, and Edward all continue to disappoint me. And now you show up demanding concessions to which you believe you are entitled as a result of simply being born. Why do you think anybody owes you anything?" Thomas could not meet her gaze. "You cannot lay all that at my feet." His tone was one of shame mixed with anger. "You mean the way you laid it at mine only moments ago?" she demanded hotly. "It is not my fault," he objected weakly. "No, your brother's actions are not your fault, but your own actions are certainly your responsibility." Feeling that he was suitably humbled, his mother changed her tone to one of reassurance. "You are building a good life for yourself. Do not get discouraged now. Keep it up, and you will come to the end of your life happy and fulfilled by all the good you have accomplished." Thomas stood in silence, looking at the floor. At last he decided to try a different tack. "Mother, you are the undisputed Baroness of Downingcourt. Can you not do as you please?" Martha looked at him blankly, not comprehending his intent. "Why not distribute the land now, so it is not an issue later?" She chortled a mirthless laugh. "Because it would be an issue later. Primogeniture," she said simply. "I do not understand." "The law of primogeniture says that a father's wealth in its entirety will pass to the firstborn son upon his death. Therefore, even if I were to divide the land among you, John could claim the divisions were illegal and make a claim on any land I may give you. I cannot be responsible for the civil war that would inevitably ensue." "John would not do that," Thomas protested. "Thomas, you must understand that I have control of Downingcourt because my sons have not yet contested it. But at any time, John or Richard could rise up and make a claim on the seat, and I would have a fight on my hands. Do you think either of them would be disposed to allow you to keep a present of land that would have gone to them?" "No, I suppose not." "I will make sure you get something," she assured him. "If it is in my power," she added, "you will get something." Thomas said nothing, but did not leave. Martha sighed, feeling guilty for having reacted to her son's childishness with anger. "Return home, and I will have one of my kitchen staff report to your house to help with some of your wife's domestic duties." Thomas smiled up at her, his darker emotions instantly replaced by excitement. "Thank you, mother," he said, taking her by the shoulders and kissing her cheek. Yes, she said dismissively. "I spoil you too much, and it will be your downfall." "I have no problem with that," Thomas replied, grinning over his shoulder as he exited the library. Martha watched him go and knew that all that she had said was lost on him. He had gotten some of what he wanted and would forget all that led up to it. She wondered from where he had inherited his sense of entitlement. Several of her sons felt the world owed them something. Perhaps it was from never really having had to work for anything. All of them knew how to work hard, but they had never had to work such that their livelihood depended on it. That was a regret that this life of privilege had brought her. She could not impart the wisdom that growing up as the daughter of a humble woodsman had instilled in her. Her sons did not know what it was like to go without, to not have enough to eat. They always knew they would be provided for no matter what. She idly wondered if Thomas would come to terms with that sense of entitlement before it led to his undoing.